Welcome to the panel room. We've got a new show for you here with Werewolves and Shifters. So before we get started, I want to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their history with either the werewolf shifter or both. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Faith.
Hi, I'm Faith Hunter. I write the Jane Yellow Rock series, the Soulwood series, and the vastly different sci-fi post-apocalyptic series of the Junkyard Cats. When it comes to shifters and werewolves, that would be the Jane Yellow Rock world and the Soulwood world, both of which have were creatures, and of them all, the werewolves are the most bizarre because they cannot, females do not survive the transition process. So all of the packs are male. And if they make a mistake and try to make another of their kind, they're destroyed by the Grindylows. So I have a very bizarre world where my poor little werewolves are concerned. My shifters, on the other hand, tend to be varying degrees of goodness and evil.
All right, great. Charlie.
Hi, I'm Charlie Cochet. I write LGBTQ romance, and my main shifter series is the Thirds. It's a little bit of a different take on shifters. I did more of a kind of scientific explanation for how the shifters came about, and it's sort of a SWAT/military team of humans and shifters, and basically what would happen to society if shifters were a part of society. It's a lot of fun, there's a lot of action and adventure, and I do fantasy shifters as well. And my Thirds shifters, actually, it's more focused on big cat shifters. I have some wolves, but the main characters are mostly big cats, tiger shifters, lions, leopards, jaguars. I have some cheetah shifters. So I love writing paranormal. I've got quite a few shifter series, and I also write romantic suspense.
All right, thank you. Jason.
My name is Jason Gilbert. I write the Cold Stone Files currently under Falstaff Books, and I also wrote the Clockworks of War series. Cold Stone Files is my werewolf series. James Coldstone is the son of the Wolfman. It's basically a police procedural with shifters, with werewolves and shifters in it. Only difference is that his best friend tends to beat him with a rolled newspaper when he's been a bad dog. The wares in my book, in my series, keep their humanity when they're shifted. So they actually have their creature lives in their mind as kind of a separate entity, and James is particularly special. We actually find out the wolf's identity in book 5, which I'm working on right now. But I also wanted to keep the true locations. So the first book, Wolfbane, actually takes place here in Rock Hill. Then book 4 is going to be coming out soon. That's on a fictional island, but book 3 that actually just came out, it's in Jacksonville, Florida. But that's, other than that, yeah, I always liked vampires and whatnot. They're cool, but as far as werewolves, I'm much more intimidated and fascinated by them. I mean, hell, right even down to my video game playing, I looked for a werewolf character. So I was drawn to Faith's series, Jane Yellow Rock series, with all the shifters and whatnot. Same thing with the Dresden Files. Actually has a complete line of wares in it. My most recent book actually has a were-mouse that turns into a pretty comical scene because they pick him up for some inappropriate behavior. You can use your imagination on that. But yeah, Cold Stone's my first foray into writing about wares, and so far I'm fairly enjoying it.
Yeah, great. Emily, how about you?
Hi, I'm Emily Lavin Leverett. I'm a medievalist English professor and editor, and today on this panel I'm a writer. I have shifters in both my series. The first series, the Icefod Chronicles, that I write with Sarah Adams, is mostly about fairies, but there are were creatures in it. My second series, which I write for Falstaff Crush, is called The Wolf and the Nun. The first book is The Wolf and the Cloister and is out now. It's a historical paranormal romance set in 12th century England, and the wares in that are a bit different. It's based on Marie de France's poem Biscleret, and the Biscleret character turns into a wolf 3 days a week. And so it's interesting for him to try to live that way.
All right, great. And finally, Tamsin.
Hey, hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm also an author with Falstaff Books. I write both urban fantasy and historical fantasy. Most recent one that I have out is the Untold Legend series. There you go. That is book one. It's The Curse of Billy the Kid. The second one came out about 2-3 weeks ago, and that's The Torment of Richard Brewer. And I'm currently finishing up The Murder of Cricket Kugler. And those definitely, the main bad in that is werewolves, or a shifting creature that is a wolf. Not necessarily ever really called, they call them werewolves, but I really did that one specifically on the moon cycle. So that's a pain in the behind. I decided this would be a great idea. So if the moon is out, they can shift. The moon is not up, they can't. And so I had to, that seemed like a really cool idea until you get to book 3. So, and other than that, I have werewolves in the Windfire series as well. And they're very different. They can shift whenever they want to. And in that series, there's both good and bad. And in mine, they tend to be just bad in the historical.
All right, great. Now, my first question, I'll start with you, Charlie. And I kind of asked this because we've done a vampire panel already, but kind of to have a feel for werewolves or shapeshifters, what tropes do you believe need to be there for it to be categorized as either a werewolf or a shifter? You know, what are those things that can't be changed? Because, you know, we all know that we all change things when we can, but what can't, just in your opinion?
Well, I would think the most obvious is they'd have to shift or change into some kind of animal. I think, you know, you can't really call it a shifter if that doesn't happen. It's a tough one because like everyone does such different things with their shifters. I think also what happens to their clothes is always a big question, that whether, you know, if they disappear. It's funny because like readers don't question the fact that you have like a human who's changing into an animal, but the question that's always asked is, you know, where do their clothes go? So, you know, whether they magically disappear or, you know, they have to get, you know, undressed first to shift, but you always have to take that into consideration. And I think also in some instances, maybe what the consequences are of that shift, like the actual shift, do they just like magically in seconds shift into an animal? Is it a more complicated procedure? In my third series, the guys, the shifters, they have to actually undress, and it's more of a painful process. So like their bones pop out of place and fur grows out of their skin, and it takes several seconds. It's not something that they just bounce back from, and there's a care process that comes after the shift as well. So I think those are, off the top of my head, I can think certain elements that we kind of see in all books that have to deal with shifters.
Definitely. Now, what makes them unique in your stories, in your universe?
Well, in my universe, what I did was the shifters came around from the use of chemical warfare during the Vietnam War, and soldiers were infected with this virus, and then they came home and infected their loved ones, and then the governments came together to create a vaccine, and that vaccine awakened a dormant mutation within the human DNA. So the strains of the animals that were used for the vaccines mixed with the human DNA started this new race of shifters. And suddenly humans were shifting into these specific animals. In my world, the shifter is equivalent to the human. So if you have like a 220-pound guy, he shifts into a 220-pound tiger. So I only have certain animals in this world. And so the thirds takes place with, they had to create this law enforcement organization because now suddenly you had people who could turn into tigers and lions, you know, running around the streets. So humans couldn't really cope with that. So we have the thirds organization, which has a fantastic acronym because it's the Therian Human Intelligence Recon Defense Squadron. So we have these teams of humans and what I call Therians in my world. And so they're trying to promote equality between humans and shifters. And so these are the series deals with Unit Alpha and Destructive Delta, which is the team that gets called out, and they're like a defense team. So they're like a SWAT team, and they get called out for shifter crimes. And so the series deals with the team really and focuses on the main couple, which is the team leader and his partner. So it deals with a lot of sort of like prejudice and how humans always kind of develop this new hate for things they don't understand. So in this world, it's the shifters and Therians and this war between humans and Therians and how this team is just trying to keep the peace and like bring about equality for everybody.
Perfect. Jason, how about you? Any tropes that are essential, and what do you do that's unique in your universe?
So, kind of, sort of like Tamsin, my wares can change whenever they want. But what's different is during the full moon, James can't help it. So, where he can be in a situation where in a pinch he can shift and in a pinch shift back to human, no problem. When the moon's out, he's a werewolf, period, dot. So he has to make sure that he is in a position where he can do a night run. So that's one of the tropes that I want to keep around. And then, of course, you know, the way they behave, their loyalty, their personalities and whatnot, because, I mean, they're dogs. Shifters in my world, the only thing they can't really shift into is another human being. So they can shift into animals or they can shift into were versions of those animals. We have that in book 1. But they're very rare. They don't happen often. And a lot of the shifter magic and a lot of the, you know, what's behind wares and whatnot has a lot to do with Native American lore and Viking lore. So you get a bit of both. Fenrir is brought up quite a few times, and then in the new book, we're starting to see some more of the Native American side of things come in as James discovers more about himself. Difference, though, is with the shifters, they've always been able to keep their humanity because they're just shifting, whereas we're not. So there was an event that happened, you know, way back when, so that they could also keep their humanity. Excuse me. But that's mostly the tropes I keep in. It goes back to with it's more of a personality thing. Now, as far as the size of them, like what Charlie was talking about, James is 6'5" and about, I'd probably give him 240. I mean, he's not a small dude. When he shifts, he's 8 feet tall and 800 pounds. He's giant. He looks about like a gorilla in a wolf suit. Same thing with all the wares. They get enormous. So that's one big difference. And that's why my shifter villain in the first book tends to prefer to shift into werewolf form when he's fighting James, so he has a fighting chance.
Now, to account for the mass, do you do anything in your writing to the change from the 240 to 800?
He feels his muscles growing. He feels his bones shifting around and changing. I mean, I keep it brief because I am the wordy dude who will give you 6 pages of what the shift looks like if you let me. So I try to keep it concise. And then as far as explaining the clothes, he has to strip or he's going to lose whatever he's wearing. So he has no problem changing if he's dressed. So there have been occasions where his best friend Phillips had to go, dude, we need to stop by the store because you're running out of outfits. You've shredded all of them.
All right. Emily, how about with yours?
Mine are a little different. Marie de France was writing in the 12th century, and her werewolf story, she's very specific. He's the first werewolf written in England that stays sane when he becomes an animal. And so it's different. Like I said, it's not on a lunar cycle, it's on a weekly cycle. So I feel you, Tamsin, with going like 1, 2, 3. How many days does it take to get to France, and how many times would he change? And but in the original story, he leaves his clothes in an abandoned church, and so I kept that. So he goes and takes off his clothes and turns into a wolf for 3 days. He's had a crisis of conscience because he thinks he's better off as a wolf than a person. He enjoys hunting and killing, and sometimes even hunting and killing people. And that happened to him. He turned into what he turned into in the Crusades. And he thinks it's a curse. Whether or not he's right, he has to figure out. But he's very much happier as a wolf, and his first wife divorced him for it because, I mean, you kind of understand. She worried that he was cheating, and it actually turned out to be worse. 3 days with a week with a mistress is solvable. 3 days as a wolf is not. So it's very different than a lot of stories for that reason. But it's also a romance, and so it's not as dark and scary as it could be. The werewolf, he is a really genuinely good person, and the other character, Marie, based on the nun Marie, is also kind of an outcast as a nun because she's also divorced. And so that's a very different thing in the 12th century.
So is it difficult basing it off the historical?
No, I dump what history doesn't suit me. There are 3 possible nuns that she is in history. We don't know. One of them is the bastard sister of Henry II. And so that's what I'm using, is that she is actually related to the crown. And I use the historical background. Honestly, the most difficult thing I have found is the fact that I had to invent fast travel because I did not have 3.5 months to get from Ireland to France. Like, it was just like, well, crap. Where are the airplanes? They're only, 8 centuries away. We can just went in. So that was like my biggest problem in terms of history was stuff like that. Thankfully, there's magic, so it's possible. But
All right, perfect. Tamsin.
Both series are very different with the way that I look at the werewolves. A lot like how Charlie has we talked about how they need to be seen as equal by the humans and talked about equality. And my Windfire series and the Moon Over Manhattan series, which will be coming out in 2021 with Falstaff, they're in the same world. And it's that idea. They can change whenever. I didn't want to deal with that at the time with the clothing. So it's kind of a magical situation when they shift back the clothes are there. And I gave myself that because I was like, it's fantasy, I can do what I want. And so, but with the Billy the Kid stuff, if they shift, the clothes are gone and they're naked. And so there are scenes I forgot to mention, I do have a skinwalker he is from a tribe in Alaska, and he's a raven. And so Billy is always being like, do you have pants with you this time? Because you're not shifting if you don't have pants. He's like, don't sit in my car. Do you have clothes? Like it's an ongoing, do you have pants situation with him? And he's a young boy. And he's like, he of course, kind of like how Jane Yellowrock is older than what she looks like. So is he. And so he's like 60 and he looks 12. And so when he shifts, but yeah, he's still of the tribe. He still just has he goes naked, or he has a loincloth of some kind, and Billy's like, these are pants, you can put these on. But as far as the usual tropes, and I really did find out the pattern of the moon in New Mexico at that time, because I'm a sadist, and I wanted to, and I played with it. It is not that way with the other one. So it's kind of what I like is that, but they both definitely take time to investigate and explain the transition, which I do think is important. I remember when one of the characters in Windfire, his first change, they have, and I do it in this one, that he's chained so that they can make sure that he can do the change safely. But I do go through bones moving and everything. And I think that's a trope that that I like to use. I guess I always want there to be, if you've got supernatural gifts or curses, there's a payment for that. I'm always a big fan of, if you're gonna get that happy Disney ending, you earn it. So if you're like, why does she torture her characters so bad? That's because I want them to earn happy. So yeah, that's a little bit of the difference. And the werewolves in the Curse of Billy the Kid series are people who don't really understand them, see them as demons. And that's not fully the case, and I don't want to give more away because it's part of the storyline.
Definitely. Now, do your werewolves or shifters, do they keep their humanity? Or do they lose it when they change?
So that's actually one of the things that's concerned in Windfire and all. They keep their humanity and all that. In the Curse of Billy the Kid, some do, some don't. Especially as we get into the 1949 section, you learn there are some that they refer to as ferals, or ferals they have tried to train. And they are a little more like serial killers instead of having a cognizant thought. So some do, some don't. Okay,
great. Faith, how about with you?
I like the moon for my wares. I like them to be forced into a change, because if they have complete control, that gives them, that takes away some of the conflict that they have to deal with. It makes them easier to write, and I don't want them to be easy to write. I don't think any character should be easy to write. I think the more conflict I introduce them into their lives, the more interesting they are to my readers, and by far more interesting to me because I'm a cruel and unusual. Tropes about clothing. My characters believe in luggage. They call go bags. Before they shift, they hang a change of clothing around their neck in a little bag. And so they take their clothing with them, they strip, put their clothing in the bag, and only when a shift is unexpected do they go without a bag. Or if they're on safe hunting ground, do my shifters and wares not carry a go bag. They can carry weapons, they can carry a phone, whatever will fit around the animal's neck and won't choke the animal and won't choke the human when they come back to human shape. So I hang on to the luggage, I hang on to the clothing. I do a lot of work with the law of conservation of mass, because I like the idea of, if you have to change into something larger, where does the mass come from? If you change into something smaller with a smaller brain, what happens to the brain, and what happens to the remainder of the body? I don't like the poof idea. So my characters use non-organic material, i.e. stone with, no possibility of fossils in it, to deposit their mass into and to take mass out of when they shift. Now that's my shifters. My were creatures are all completely bound by the law of conservation of mass. So if the only ones that survived the curse that created were creatures are the ones that were large enough to shift into that creature. Anything else shifted and died, and so those were creatures disappeared and never came back. And therefore, all of my were creatures are predators because they would have eaten anything else that they perceived as a threat. And that has made it, that saved me a lot of trouble. I don't have to worry about were rats or were gophers or anything small. All of my wares are predators, and they fit in with the size change of humans. That said, I do have a 300-pound werewolf, and I did not explain where he got the genes for that, but in my opinion, there could still be direwolf genes left over in our wild wolves, and no one has ever said that's not so. And so that's where those that one particular big hulking werewolf comes from. So I think I answered all of your questions. I'm not sure. Oh, and I do like the trope. I do use the trope of silver being that will immobilize them. That doesn't necessarily kill them, but if they are shot with silver, the silver has to be dug out before they can shift back. And so therefore they can be killed with a silver bullet if it hits them at the wrong time, if it's not dug out so they can shift back. Silver can shift them, can kill them. Regular ammo does not. So I did play with that trope, and I've had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I kind of did the same thing in a way. The silver to werewolves in my world is poison. So getting shot, I mean, one of us gets shot in the shoulder, it's really going to hurt, and we're going to need medical attention, but they'll dig the bullet out and we'll probably be fine. James gets shot in the shoulder and the bullet is in there, but now he's getting silver into his bloodstream and it is spreading through his body. And it has to be dug out before it kills him off.
Yeah,
and then he'll be hung over for it. It's not just oh, I'm fine. He's got to get over being poisoned.
I do that with my vampire characters.
Yeah.
The longer the silver stays in them, the more poisonous it is, the more toxic it becomes, and they can die from silver poisoning. But I let my werewolves be able to mostly just be stuck in form and in a great deal of pain, and eventually have to have surgery to remove the toxin.
Now your Jane Yellowrock series, she's a skinwalker.
Yes.
Which Tamsin did mention. Could you explain a little bit about the difference between the were creatures and a skinwalker, at least in your universe?
In my universe, wares always shift into the creature that bit them, that turned them, or the creature that birthed them in the case of certain species which are capable of procreation in a more biological manner, as opposed to a violent manner. The skinwalkers are, in my world, have always been Cherokee to this point. I've not dealt with the Western the Western tribal mythos. I have stayed with the pre-white man Cherokee skinwalker version, which they led the tribe into battle. They were the leaders. They were the guides. They were not the shaman. They were not wise women. They were strictly battle leaders in my world, and in this one pre-white man version of skinwalkers. So when you combine the need to be the same size, or the risk of losing your humanity if you become something smaller and you can't figure out how to get that part of you back into yourself when you shift again into human. And then also the problem of what happens if you can't discard the extra mass you took on to, say, become a buffalo, or, well, not a buffalo, but a larger predator, a werelion, that's necessity much larger and heavier than your human self. Then if you shift back and you can't get rid of that extra mass, how big are you going to be? And mine are going to maintain that mass. So that's the fear every time that they shift mass, is that they're going to be larger or smaller or lose themselves. And so it's a real concern in terms of problem solving and conflict. And like I said, I really like to torture my characters, so I let that be a problem all the way through it. But that is, I think, that law of conservation of mass sort of sets them aside a little bit from the norm of skinwalkers that that are a part of traditional mythos in all parts of the world.
All right.
Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes. I was wanting to know more about skinwalkers, and there we go. So the next question is going to kind of jump off a little bit. And I'm going to start with you, Jason. And I might know the answer based on the fact that your character is the son of, the Wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the most influential literary, creature, werewolf, related, how do I say this, movie or book that drew you to werewolves?
So I would be tacky and say American Werewolf in London, but I actually didn't watch that in its entirety until about 2 years ago. So it's always been more artwork than anything. I've always liked, the artist renditions, the more gothic looking artwork of werewolves and the whole concept of it. There was a video game back in the day called Killer Instinct, and there was a character named Saberwolf, was a werewolf character that I played with all the time, and that's his look is what Jane's is based on. And then as the vampire craze really ramped up, and we had True Blood, and then we had Twilight come out, and it was like, yeah, the next Twilight movie has werewolves, and so I went and saw it, and Jacob turned into Marmaduke, and that's not a werewolf. So then came Dog Soldiers, and I don't know if any of y'all have seen that. Those are werewolves. Biped, real nasty werewolves. And it reminded me of the old Lon Chaney movie, an upright wolf man. So that's kind of where I drew from. And then as far as what, goes through James's head with his wolf, that is, like I said, his wolf has more of a Viking background, Fenrir, the wolf god, and that gets delved more into in the new book. But yeah, it's mostly been film and art. I read one werewolf book back in the 90s, and it was horrible. And then I read the Jane Yellowrock books, and I liked the Shifters and whatnot that she had going on in there. But most of my influence, honestly, has been visual media.
Emily?
100% for this one, it's the poetry of Marie de France. Like, it's
Of
the
course.
romances. And it's also medieval romance, though. That's what my scholarship is on. And it's not romance like I write romance now, but knights and ladies and, adventures and monsters and magic and all of that kind of stuff, Arthuriana. And I've always loved those. And so it was interesting to get a chance to rewrite them like the ways that I wanted to. In Marie, he has to have his clothes to change. So when his wife finds out, in Marie's story, when his wife finds out she has a knight who has a crush on her, steal his clothes so that he's stuck as a wolf for years. For me, it's not the clothing. He has a talisman, and if that's taken away, he'll turn into a wolf no matter what, but it's the only way he can get back into being a person. And so at one point he does lose it. And I did discover it is kind of hard to write a book from the point of view of a person who can't talk, because they're a dog and dogs can't talk. So like fast travel, I had to find a way to fix that. But yeah, the history and just the idea of knights, and I deal a little with a crusade, but not much. It's not necessarily a pro-crusader point of view. But the big bads in the book are demons and people that are using or being used by demons, not any particular other group of people, which is straying from the subject matter. The subject matter would have definitely been, you know, pro-crusade. But yeah, mostly medieval stuff.
Okay. Tamsin?
So Windfire series, I would say actually, because I'm a gamer, mine came from a LARP that I used to play, which was a mixture of Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse by White Wolf. And a lot of the art in there. And in that series, my wolves can do different sizes. They can be normal wolf size, they can be larger, they can be on their hind legs and be the typical big werewolf that you imagine. And you see a lot of that drawn in the White Wolf books. And so I kind of got my idea for them there. As far as the Untold Legends, they actually just look like wolves. And they are bigger or smaller based on how big they are as a human being. But the reason I chose wolves was because it is we're taking place out in the Wild West. It's 1878. And I wanted, so there's a creature in Irish folklore that I built off of, and she is known as the creator of monsters and heroes. And so for her monsters, I chose wolves because I felt it would blend the best into that time. And then of course, Billy of course is some of the heroes she makes to battle them, because she likes to pull strings and be the puppet master and cause chaos. So, but yeah, I didn't choose that based on any kind of movies or anything. I just really wanted wolves because it fit better with the time for historical work.
Okay. Faith?
I'll take this in a slightly different direction. I've made it a point to avoid certain people's existing work. I made sure that my pack structure was nothing like Patricia Briggs's pack structure. So I read it her series very carefully. I'm a huge fan anyway, so, not a burden. But I made sure that my pack structure was very different. I made sure that the method through which my were creature shift was nothing like Laurel K. Hamilton's were creatures. And anything else I could think of that someone had very successfully used were creatures, I at least flipped through them and made sure that I did not infringe on something that they did that that took things away from a trope. I wanted to make sure I went my own way. So as much as possible, I went my own way. And my creation myth, I set up as one of the goddesses of the hunt cursed an animal who attacked one of her favorites, and that animal carried the contagion of the were virus into the wild. And that's where those creatures came from, was from being cursed by one of the goddesses of the hunt. So as instead of talking about what I read or emulated, that's what I avoided as much as possible. If I accidentally copied somebody else, well, that's just the nature of being a writer. Sometimes you get something from someone that you've never read before, and your minds work along the same way because we live in the same culture and we have the same ethos and backgrounds. And a lot of times you can end up copying some small thing somewhere that you don't intend to. But I made a real strong effort to not match things that were already successfully in the urban fantasy field when I came along.
Do you think that made it easier for you or harder?
Easier, because I've discovered that the more strain I put on my world in terms of stress and conflict, the easier it is to find that little tiny avenue of relief to get past those demanding conflicts and find some new creation thing that nobody's done before. So the more I dump characters and myself, the more believable my world becomes, and the easier it is for my fans to suspend that disbelief and move into whatever it is I've created.
Perfect, thank you. Charlie.
For me, it wasn't any particular book or anything. I'm a big movie buff, and I'm a kid of the 80s, so I used to love all the fantasy movies from the 80s. Paranormal was actually something that I was challenging myself with, because I actually started writing historical romance. And then I did a little event where the prompt was for a short shifter story, and I had so much fun with it. And it was actually a Siberian Husky shifter for that story, but it was so much fun. I was like, okay, I want to write a series of shifters. And at the time in our genre, it was mostly werewolf wolf shifters and fated mates, and those kind of romance stories. There was a lot of them, and much like Faith, I didn't read them because I didn't want to write anything like that. And what I did was I read a lot of blurbs, I read a lot of reviews on loads of these books, and I thought, okay, I want to do something completely different. So I don't have any magic in the thirds. It's more of an alternative universe. It's all kind of scientifically based. Has a very contemporary feel to it. It's a lot of felids, and so it's mostly big cat shifters, and it's more, like I said, more law enforcement, SWAT, military style. So I went a completely different route. And now I read all kinds of paranormal and stuff now, but at the time I wanted to keep everything separate and just go a different direction than what was going on in our genre at the time.
All right, thank you. Now, Emily, if you had some advice to give someone that was writing werewolf or shifter story, what would you tell them? Other than reading medieval romance.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of werewolves in that. There aren't very many shifters. I sort of found the one, at least in English. Sort of similar to what Faith and Charlie were saying, pretty much to write what you want. It can be super easy to be constrained by what you think people think it should be. And there is space for people to do things differently. Even though mine are romance novels in the modern sense, I'm pretty sure I'm not ever going to deal with a fated mate situation. That just is not one of the ones that I'm interested in. But I would also say read outside of that stuff. Like, read, because medieval romance does not have a lot to do with a lot of modern urban fantasy until you read it and see that it could. And so that just happened to be my way into it. And I never in a million years thought I would write romance. if you went back and told me at 22, hey, guess what? When you're in your 40s, you'll be writing romance. I'd have thought that something had happened to me and I was a horrible feminist, and God only knows what it was that had happened between then and now. But now that I understand romance, I understand it might be the most feminist genre out there. But like, yeah, just don't be afraid to do things the way you want to do them, so long as you stay coherent in your own world.
Tamsin?
Oh yeah, I get to go after that. Thank you so much. Because yeah, that's what I was thinking when you asked the question. Enjoy what you write. There's no rules. This is fantasy. You can do what you want. And so write what you love, whatever you see in your head, whatever you like to do. You know, if you want them to be bigger or small, it doesn't matter what you do with their clothes and whether they change and you go through all that. It's about whether or not you really see it, and if you really have a passion for it, and if you just create the world, make that world strong, stick to it, and then follow through, and you can't go wrong. You just can't. It's fantasy.
All right, perfect. Faith.
Oh, huh? What was the question again? I'm with Tamsin. After Emily said all that, I'm going, Yeah, so what was the question again?
Just writing advice you'd give to someone that's wanting to write in this genre, or your specific genre, because I know we've got, 5 people here, and they're all slightly different, but they're all still shifters or werewolves. So
I really stink at writing romance. I can write romantic tension, but I can't really write romance. I know my limits. My urban fantasy tends to be toward action, adventure, violence, solving of crimes, murder, vengeance. So I always go back. I've always gone back to my roots. Before I wrote as Faith Hunter, I wrote as Gwen Hunter, and I wrote medical mysteries. I wrote women's fiction. I wrote Women in Jeopardy, which are thrillers that are about women, because you can't just call it a thriller and have it be about a woman character, because real thriller writers would get their panties in a wad. And so would a lot of our real thriller readers, or so the conventional wisdom went. So I wrote all of that, and that meant knowing police procedure, and that meant doing ride-alongs, and that meant reading a lot of I don't care for true crime, but a lot of work written by people who do their research in forensics, and also knowing some forensic pathologists. So I can call and ask questions even after 10 years. I can call and say, hey, remember me? And I say, oh yeah, well, I'm writing different stuff now. I have a vampire. I want that one to dissolve. So, I can use all of those Gwen abilities and all of that research and all of those contacts. And I like reading crime fiction, not the true stuff, but crime fiction. And that has been the biggest help to me in terms of writing urban fantasy with an adventure flair as opposed to a romance flair. That's the only thing I have to offer there.
Write what you know.
Exactly. And utilize all of your resources, which include people and your past. So.
Oh, I had a 2-hour discussion with someone about lie and how it affected a dead body in a casket and how long she was buried. And we at least 2 hours on Zoom discussing dead bodies and
did you discuss the correct kind of lime?
We did.
Yeah.
We had to discuss the kind of lime that would have been used in 1949.
Right.
Specifically, and how much it would have done, and because when they buried her, they filled her casket with it to help cover up evidence.
Yeah,
and I had to know.
That's the thing with historical. I didn't learn until I wrote a medieval historical romance that they didn't have matches until the 1800s. Thank you to my editor, Lucy Blue, who knew that and was like, nope, you can't do this. Oh,
yeah.
I should have known that.
All right,
Yep.
perfect. So you had, Tamsin, you said 2-hour Zoom call. About how much does that take up in the story?
It's a couple page scene.
Okay.
But I needed it right because all of the historical books about opening her casket, everyone talked about how she would have just been bones. And I'm like, I don't think that's right. And so I wanted to find out exactly how I was going to describe when they exhume her. I needed to be able to describe what Billy sees. And I didn't want to be wrong.
Perfect.
But yeah, it's like a page where we actually discuss what she looks like. It's a paragraph.
But if you hadn't done that, how many people would have complained?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, someone would have. Yeah.
All right. So Charlie, how about you? Some writing advice for people?
I definitely write what you're passionate about. I think that's really important because I think if you just try to write to trend or you try to force something that's not really in you, in your heart, it'll come through in your writing and your readers will be able to tell. If you're passionate about something and you're excited about what you're writing and you love what you're writing, your readers pick up on that and they get excited about it too. And, you know, because it's not just you writing behind a screen and then throwing it out there, you know, especially with social media, there's interaction with your readers. And, you know, it's the best thing in the world is when they contact you and they message you and they're like, oh my God, I love this character. And, you know, I love this scene. And, you know, they know more about your book than you do, because if you ever forget something, all you have to do is say, when did this happen? They can tell you, hey, chapter 3, book 5, paragraph 4, third line, you know. So I think it's really important just to write what you're passionate about. But also, even if it's fantasy, paranormal, shifters, research is really important. I know even if there's magic involved, for the thirds, I had to do a lot of research because there was the SWAT element to it. So I had to consult with people about the kind of equipment, the kinds of, you know, their armories, the guns, everything. And then all the, remember your rules. So if you make up rules in your world, because then someone will point that out later on. It's like, no, but wait, you said they couldn't do this, and then but you've got them doing this over in this book. So I think remembering your rules, and if you're writing a series, don't wait until book 7 to start a story Bible. Start with book 1. Because I made
Jesus
that
for Melissa.
Yeah. The third series is 10 books with 2 companion books that are both 120,000 words each, plus spin-offs. So book Bible is really important. So I would recommend starting that like book 1 if you know it's going to be a series. It's very important.
And now
my editor does that for me, and I love her immensely. I cannot say good enough things about Melissa MacArthur. I can't.
So I've probably given Jason the hardest one to have the writer advice after everyone else. But
I agree. I agree. You gave me the hardest one, and I agree with everybody. Have fun with it. I mean, your werewolf does not have to be a tortured character. James is not even remotely tortured by the fact that he is a werewolf. He has other things torturing him. He has severe daddy issues, obviously. But, I mean, for crying out loud, in my series, a character beats a werewolf with a rolled newspaper. There's another scene where he snarls in the guy's face, and the guy looks at him and goes, save that shit for somebody who didn't go to college with you. So, you know, have a good time with it. And, you know, like Emily said, write what you know. I don't write romance. I don't write sex scenes. I like to write what I'm good at. So, you know, I stick to mystery and whatnot. Yes, I know exactly what I said, Tamsin. So, I mean, you know, have fun. And, you know, like Charlie said, be passionate. Tamsin is broken. Emily is trying not to be. You know, and if you're writing a super serious book, and that's cool, and that's your bag, but it's starting to bog you down, man. I mean, write a scene that's funny as all hell and completely out of character, but then don't delete it. Put it away in a folder called Words for Later, because you may surprise yourself that that scene that you wrote that made no sense and was completely out of character, and you were literally just putting a snot rocket on the screen because you needed to explode for a minute, that might come in handy later. And there's a day where in that particular chapter you're in a pinch, but you're trying to get your 1,000-word goal because you're that anal retentive, and you can just copy paste 700 of those words and you're done because what you wrote that day fit right there. Every book that I've written, every single one, I do my chapters by different files, and then every book has a folder called Words for Later. So definitely with Charlie do the World Bible, because I waited till book 3 to start doing that, and I'm ready to blow my brains out. But the Words for Later folder is probably some of the best advice I've ever been given. Never delete, no matter how goofy you think it is, because you never know, you might be able to use that.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And that's going to do it for us today. But before we leave, go around again and let everyone know where they can find you on social media or find your books. And start with you, Tamsin.
People can find me at tamsinsilver.com. You can also find me on Twitter under Tamsin Silver. Same thing on Facebook. And you can also join, I have a new newsletter that I'm doing. And you can join that, or you can ask me questions right through my actual first page on my website. Every single topper has a place where you can just jump to and ask questions. I'm going to be doing live videos soon on Facebook, and I'll be addressing that. So you'll be able to find me there as well.
All right, perfect. Faith.
I can be found at faithhunter.net, and while I do occasionally appear at Twitter, I don't enjoy it at all. I might show up there literally once a month to go through and look at all of the things I've ignored. I just detest it. So I'm not very fond of Facebook either, but I do go to Facebook more often. I have several fan pages there. I have Beast has her own page called Beast Is Not Prey. And I can be found under Faith Hunter and Faith Hunter Official, Faith Hunter Author. You can do all of those searches and you can find me. And then the fan pages are fairly easy to find thereafter.
All right, perfect. And Charlie?
My website is charliecochet.com. I'm mostly on Facebook. I have a really active Facebook reader group that you can find under my author name. It's great. We do all kinds of fun stuff in there, giveaways and a lot of exclusives, cover reveals and that kind of stuff. So I'm on Facebook more than my other social media. And my Facebook is under Charlie Cochet as well. But yeah, I've got Twitter and all that under the same author name. I'm easy to find on social media because I just use my name for everything. But yeah, Facebook is the best place. And then my website has all my books and the info and the blurbs and everything.
All right. Jason?
You can find me on Facebook espousing bullshit, usually on a daily basis. You can search me by name, Jason Gilbert, because I'm super creative. Jason Gilbert, author, for my author page. I have an author page on Amazon. You can check out my website, jasonhgilbert.com, that I probably really need to update because I really suck at that. I do have a newsletter, so as soon as you go to the site, you can sign up for that. That's actually about to change up soon, so if you like free stuff, definitely check that out. And if you really don't feel like hunting me by individual and you want to check out a bunch of other awesome authors, you can also check me out at falstaff.com. Falstaff Books, they've got a whole slew of awesome authors that I get to hang out with and sell books with. And yeah, buy my stuff. See, I said stuff, not shit. You happy, Jim?
And then Emily.
You can find me at emilylavinleverett.com. That's my author page. There's a newsletter sign up there, and with signing up for the newsletter, you get a free story It's a vampire story set in the Icefod Chronicles world. You can find me on Twitter at Emily Leverett, Facebook, Emily Leverett, Instagram, Emily Leverett Author. But that's mostly cat pictures. And lately, because my school is still managing to meet face-to-face every day before class, I take a picture and post a selfie of my mask of the day. So you can follow that if you like. My newsletter also has masking cat pictures in it. And if you watch online cons and stuff, I've got some stuff that'll be at Multiverse too in a few weeks in October. And I think some other people on the panel do as well. So that's something you can check out as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.